And now let's join Robin Day. Robin?
Well, after the canvassing and the campaigning, the cheering and the champagne, the tough realities of responsibility in office. And Mr Heath's government will have to face the same continuing problem that all post-war British governments have tried and failed to solve: how to get economic growth without inflation. The Labour government has left the balance of payments in fine surplus, and Mr Wilson, in that quiet but vigorous and proud interview, in a way, could fairly claim to have left that welcome legacy to Mr Heath, the new tenant of number 10. But inflation, wages, costs and prices threatens to undermine our competitive position, and also the plight of poorer people at home. Our growth and productivity does still not match some of our competitors, and strikes have vastly increased in number. All these and many more problems are now the responsibility of Edward Richard George Heath, who in about an hour and a half's time will accept the Queen's commission to form a government. Well, now to comment on some of the key economic and industrial problems facing the new Prime Minister are Vic Feather, General Secretary of the TUC, Lord Stokes, Chairman and Managing Director of British Leyland, whose factories have suffered greatly from strikes recently, and in the absence of Mr Heath's active senior colleagues, who are keeping quiet for the moment to see what portfolios are given to them by their leader, we have, fortunate to have, Sir Edward Boyle, a senior ex-Conservative Cabinet Minister who's retired from politics at the end of the last Parliament, and he's going to join us. Gentlemen, I want to ask you, what is your advice to Mr Heath on the key industrial and economic problems he faces now? Lord Stokes?
I think we've got to get a compromise arrangement between management and the unions and the people on the shop floor to solve this problem, which has been very acute, particularly in the last 12 to 18 months, of industrial disputes, people walking out of work, excessive wage gains, which have not been accompanied by increased productivity.
Do you think Mr Heath would be wise to press ahead with some kind of legislation for a new framework of law for trade union activity?
I think he'd be very wise to have immediate consultations with management and with men and with the TUC and with the trade union leaders and everybody else. I don't believe that we can accomplish anything by threatening to put everybody in jail, but I think we've got to get a completely new atmosphere in the industrial scene.
Of course, Mr Heath has never threatened to put any industrialists or trade union leaders in jail, as Mr Vic Feather knows. But, Mr Feather, what advice do you give to Mr Heath on this central problem?
I would say hear to what Donald Stokes has said, and what I know as well that Frank Caton said, and Paul Chambers, and also, if I might say so, although I'm not a lawyer, Lord Justice Donovan, Mr Justice Lane and Sir Henry Slessor. These are three great industrialists and three great lawyers, and all of them are saying that law won't work, and I hope that Mr Heath will forget, now that he has the responsibility at any rate, some of the promises that he made as an opposition leader about fair deal at work. I think it's better to forget it and get it in some discussion. And if he gets into discussion, we'll discuss matters with him, but not on the basis of acceptance of legislation.
But if he does pass legislation with a mandate from the country to pass it in constitutional form, you, as a law-abiding citizen, will abide by those laws, will you not?
Of course, if it's practicable law and if it's law that will work. But on the other hand, I think that he will be wise to see whether the law will work.
Before I bring in Sir Edward Boyle, may I just ask both of you, key men in industry, do you think it is right in the next few months or the next year or so to reduce taxation with the aim of reducing the pressure for wage increases, perhaps?
I think it depends how you allocate taxation. I think we've got to get taxation so that we can give reasonable incentives to people to work harder. I think the whole trouble is I'm not against a degree of inflation in the country. I think this is probably inevitable and desirable. What is troubling me at the moment is that certain sectors of the community, because of the position they hold in industry or various industrial communities, are able to get more than their share of what is going out of the sort of common pool. What we've got to do is to get more productivity, get more out of people and reward them commensurately for giving more to the
community
in return.
And Sorry, bring in Sir Edward here.
Sorry.
Sorry, come back here, Mr Feather. Edward, what do you think about the sensible course on these problems?
Robin, I can't help looking back to that discussion. I thought the most interesting almost in the whole election when Lord Cromer and Lord Caton, holding opposite political standpoints, said the situation facing the new government today is more difficult than the situation facing Mr. Wilson's government in '64. Now, I feel there are three key subjects today, myself. The first, which I don't think either Lord Stokes or Vic Feather have mentioned specifically, capital investment by industry. I do not like this declining trend in manufacturing investment. That's the biggest failure in George Brown's national plan. The second is, of course, the wages problem. I don't want to see a return to statutory control. Equally, I don't think the government can stand aside from this altogether. And thirdly, there is the question of the reform of industrial relations. And here I must say, I don't think you can expect Mr. Heath's government just to forget about Fair Deal at Work. The important thing here is to raise productivity.
Fair Deal at Work being there.
The Conservative, that's right, the Conservative manifesto, the Conservative pamphlet, because I do feel that there are cases where a minority in industry, a minority, are making it very difficult for the majority to pursue higher productivity. And I can't feel that the legal framework, which goes right back really to 1906, meets all the needs of 1970.
Can I ask you a key question about the new government? What kind of Minister of Labour would you like to see, and do you have any personal names to suggest?
Well, I would like to see a Minister of Labour
Rather than
the First Secretary of the Department of Employment and Productivity. And I would, I'm sorry, I'm not old-fashioned about this, but I think that the Ministry of Labour, as was, did play a key part on the special functions of conciliation. And I would like to see that again.
What sort of... do you
I
have
would like
any...
to see a fair-minded man, a man who was not, as it were, too political, a man who was not identified with some of the extravagances of political speeches in the election campaign. That is the sort of man that you want, a kind of, I would have thought, a man like, if one could say it, like Sir Walter Monckton.
Not a male Barbara Castle?
No, she's a very positive character, as you know.
Edward, a final word. What do you say about Mr. Heath and Mr. Wilson at the end of this campaign?
Well, first...
And I know you speak as someone now retired from politics.
Yeah. Well, first, Mr. Heath, Robin, I believe that Mr. Heath does believe very passionately in a reform free enterprise system for the sake of the better life it'll bring. And all I can say, and I speak with a bit of emotion, this is literally my last day in politics, I don't believe any new Prime Minister has ever had a more deep and a more honourable ambition to be Prime Minister of this country, and more determination. And all I can say is, as someone who's known him very well for 20 years, with all my heart I wish him well.
And on your last day in politics, can you find a magnanimous word to say about Harold Wilson?
Well, I think this is the last day one would want to knock Harold Wilson unfairly. May I say again, in all my years in the House of Commons, I've nothing but courteous relations with him personally. He's always been friendly enough to me. It's difficult today to see just how history will rate him. I think, looking back on it, I think he did often think that affairs were going more his way than they were. He seemed to feel he had more freedom of action than he had. I think there is something in this point, not that he lacked the courage of his convictions, but that he lacked a lot of convictions to be courageous about. But when all's said and done, he's a person who's had vast experience in Whitehall and Westminster, and I think we must all realise what a disappointing day this must be for him.
Well, the fair-minded comments of a parliamentarian in the better tradition of Westminster.